What's good, my people? It's your boy Godfrey here, coming at you from Sober Take Boxing, and today we're going to be talking about Moses Itauma against Dillian Whyte. It's a Friday afternoon at the moment. The fight's tomorrow. The current, you could say, weigh-ins today. I saw the press conference. I've been seeing the build-up throughout this week, and it's getting quite interesting. We know the narrative that's being thrown around. You've got the young fighter Moses Itauma coming in and more or less looking to take him out in the first couple of rounds, and people are more or less just questioning Dillian Whyte, see what he's got left in him really. So it's going to be interesting. The build up has been interesting as well this week. Dillian Whyte is almost a bit mellow this week, more mature, maybe a lot older, and I think he's just laser focused on the fight, to be honest with you. But if there's a question to be put forward right now, is how competitive is the fight, Moses Itauma against Dillian Whyte? And to be fair, I think there are two ways to answer it. I think on paper it's very competitive, whereas I think according to the public, I don't think some are probably looking at it from that perspective. I think some of them think Moses Itauma is going to get him out in the first couple of rounds, to be honest with you. So I think it's an intriguing fight because of it. And to be honest with you, I think Dillian Whyte hasn't looked great against Ebenezer Tete last year, and hasn't really fought competitively, I'll say, for the last 3 years at least. I think, was it 2022 when he last fought Jermaine Franklin, which is probably the most competitive fight he was in. So I can understand why the public is writing Dillian Whyte off just because he hasn't been active. It's more inactivity that's really making people question whether Dillian Whyte's really got a chance against Moses Itauma, because let's be honest, Moses has been looking almost pitch perfect against the opponents that he's faced. But let's be honest, man, I think when nothing is coming back and all you can do is be offensive, then I suppose you are going to look good, right? Like a lot of those fighters that Moses Itauma has faced, more or less any other prospect would have probably looked just as good as he did against some of those fighters that he's faced, or journeymen, whatever you want to call them, really. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting fight. It's about a 17-year gap between them, so there's a huge age gap. I think Dillian Whyte's son's actually older than Moses. So it's going to be interesting just to see how the fight goes, to be honest with you. It's really going to be interesting to see what happens and, how it's going to more or less go in this particular fight. But if we had to look at the fighter's background, if we look at and start with Moses Itauma has had 24 amateur fights. He's won all 24 fights, and he's won the the gold world youth medal as well. He's won, I think, more or less everything when it comes to some of the youth championships. So let's be honest, I think they fast tracked him just because he's probably looked really, really good in the amateurs. And what's interesting, I saw a video pop out from I don't know his name, but it's a coach, it's a boxing coach, and he's been in he's looked at Moses in the amateurs, and he said in one of the podcasts, and he said that Moses has barely been hit in the amateurs, and he was just more or less too good against the opponents he faced in the amateurs, which basically means he hasn't really been tested anywhere. I just think he's been a lot bigger, a lot stronger than many of the fighters that he's faced in the amateurs, and he was just too good. But then it begs the question, 24 fights is not, as I said, even in my previous video, I don't think is an extensive amateur record. It's not a lot of fights, to be honest with you. Yes, he's undefeated, and he's done what he's done in the amateurs and to be fast-tracked into the pros, but it's not enough. But if we had to move on to Dillian Whyte, Dillian Whyte as well had a very short amateur career, 6 fights, won all 6, 5 by way of knockout. I guess one of the fighters he beat in the amateurs was Anthony Joshua. So yeah, I suppose Dillian Whyte had a really short amateur career, and I think it's due to his kickboxing background. And I think due to those difficulties, they decided to get him into the pros, really. I think one of his coaches wanted him to stay as an amateur, but he decided to go ahead and become a professional boxer. But let's be honest, Dillian Whyte has been in with more or less everyone, in his era. Joseph Parker, Oscar Rivas, Alexander Povetkin, Tyson Fury, Anthony Joshua. He's been in with the best of the best. He's gained a lot of experience from it. Had some great wins against Lucas Brown, Joseph Parker, Oscar Rivas, Alexander Povetkin. And he's only lost 3 fights, which was one of them was redeemed against Alexander Povetkin. Let's be honest, the first fight, Dillian Whyte was more or less bullying him, knocked him down 3 times, and then the punch from Thanos came out of nowhere. To be honest with you, so yeah, 3 losses, redeemed one of them, and to be honest, I'll say Anthony Joshua's loss was early in his career, as well. Had a shoulder surgery right after that, so he wasn't in the greatest condition then. And then you've got Tyson Fury again, wasn't in the best mental condition then. So he's made a lot of mistakes throughout his career, but then again, he's learned a lot. So he has gained a lot of experience. Against those fighters. So it comes down to how good are the fighters. Even if we start with Moses, I think Moses is great. I think he's a fantastic fighter. We've seen him, how good he is offensively. There is no secret that he is probably, if not one of the best offensive fighters I've seen in a very long time. Especially someone coming up as a prospect, as good as he is. I think he's versatile, he's sharp, he's quick, he's agile, and you can tell he has a high boxing IQ for his age. He understands boxing, and there's a lot of good things that people have said about him, about sparring. A lot of the pros, the likes of Tyson Fury, Lawrence Okolie said he boxed him when he was 15 and he was holding his own, and how there is a lot of bravery from him, because if you're going on with big punches but you're just able and happy to stick in with them, then I think that's where you're gonna get a lot of the praise from these boxers, right? So when you ask a lot of these professional boxers, a lot of them will say, look, he's the real deal, he's really, really good. But then again, you can't really go by what he's done in the pros, and I think in terms of what he's done and how he's getting them out of there, he's been knocking everybody out in the pros. It is, like, in my personal opinion, you could say that you have to give him the credit, right? Like, regardless, I think you have to give him the credit and say, look, not everybody can get some of these fighters out in the first, second round, third round. It might take even some prospect 4, 5, 6 rounds to get these guys out of there, but he's been able to do it in the first, second, third round. Third round, I think just the first and the second, to be honest with you, I think the 2 fighters on his record that he didn't knock out, that was very durable, took him, they went to points, which was a 6-round fight. So look, he hasn't fought anyone at the level of Dillian Whyte, but he's looked really good against the fighters that he's faced. So Moses is excellent, and I think he's going to be a fighter for the future. I think he's a high level operator, but again, it's all about, he just has question marks everywhere at the moment, because he hasn't been tested. And Dillian Whyte, how good he is, I think he's great. I think he's fought at the highest level. At some point he was actually top 3 in the Ring magazine as well, and he was there for a reason. I think more or less the boogeyman of the heavyweight division at one point, when I think it's Deontay Wilder that made him wait I think over 1,000 days. So he was one to be reckoned with, and I think a lot of people were avoiding him. Um, and when we're looking at the preparation of both fighters, how have they really prepared? And let's be honest. Let's be honest. Let's start with Dillian Whyte. I think Dillian Whyte is probably looked the best he's ever looked in the heavyweight division. I don't think he's ever looked as good as he has done. Like he may not be the first to admit it, but I don't think he's looked that good. Even early in his career, like there's always been a bit of. I don't think I've seen him as lean as he has for this fight, and I think that's why I think this fight is going to be very different. I think he's really up for this fight. When you hear Buddy McGirt speak and talk about how he's prepared for the fight, he said he's never seen him work as hard as he has in this fight. Like, don't get me wrong, Buddy hasn't been with Dillian Whyte for that long, but he's done a lot of road work for this fight. It's quite an old school classic, you know, and I do think he's fully prepared. He's fully prepared for whatever comes, really. So, and it's interesting because I think Moses as well looks like he's a very disciplined young man. He's got a great team around him, the likes of Ben Davidson, his father. He's got, you know, his family around, his brothers around. They're both, I would have imagined, would have prepared really well for the last 14 weeks or 12 weeks, however long it, you know, their camp was. But let's be honest, I think it's two different dynamics when it comes to approach for this fight. And what I mean by that is when you look at Team Davidson and Team White, or you could say Team Itauma and Team White, Ben Davidson team with Lee Wiley Boxing. I love Lee Wiley Boxing. Big up Lee Wiley. His channel is great. I love his channel. And Lee Wiley is someone who literally analyze fights to the T, right? So like they look at every little detail there is and try to execute a game plan based upon what they see from their analysis. Whereas Buddy McGirt, it's, you know, it's not a secret. Videos going around. Buddy have said he's not looked at Moses Itauma, and everybody was blown away by that, right? They were like, whoa, like, okay. People were thinking, well, Dillian Whyte may not even last 2-3 rounds, you know. And Buddy was like, look, you know, I've never looked at my fights when I was fighting, and I'm not looking at, you know, I'm not studying fighters, because he wants to look at his own fighters' performance. He wants to be able to get his fighters at the best level possible and not be so tunnel visioned in what the opponent is going to do. And it's interesting because sometimes there's a balance to that. Like even in chess, right? The way you win a chess game is don't just think about your own moves, think about your opponent's move as well. Because normally, sometimes you don't know you've blundered up unless you've studied what the opponent's going to do. Because in chess, it's like, okay, if I move there, what is he going to do? You have to think of the opponent's best move. That's how chess is. You always got to think 5-10 steps ahead. So it's interesting that Buddy said, look, you know what, I don't bother looking at Moses. And I can understand that. He's saying what's there to study is just knockouts. And I think there's a balance. It's going to be interesting to see which dynamic works for this fight. Because Buddy has been great as a coach and as a fighter, right? And it looks like his philosophy is working, because he's basically saying he wants his fighters to be prepared for anything and everything. So when whatever comes back, they're ready. And I get that. I actually truly do get that. But I think the cons of the other side, which is Team Ben Davidson, is sometimes you can be so focused on the opponent's approach or the opponent's last fight, where you analyze their mistakes and you analyze them so much to the T, that what if they fix some of those elements up and then they don't come up the way you expected them to come out? And then you've left a 20-year-old to do their own thing, really, because they're saying, look, the game plan ain't working. What do I have to do? And then they just got to think on their own 2 feet. And that's when experience will literally flourish in that fight, because Moses, I think, would be like, I don't know what to do because the game plan ain't working. So what am I'm just got to think on my own 2 feet. And I think this is where Moses can be in real big trouble. I guess, obviously, I've seen some of the videos from Ben Davidson where he said, look, they're looking at tendencies, and I agree with him. You can't fix certain tendencies up in one camp. So whatever Buddy and Team White has been working on, whether there will be those tendencies, I don't know, and we will have to wait and see in terms of how they come and appear on Saturday night. But sometimes you can be so focused on a particular game plan where they will take you out of theory, and then you don't know how to respond. And I think that might be a problem. It'll be very problematic if they've got one game plan and it's not working. Because whatever White and Buddy's worked in camp, it's those tendencies aren't showing. So yeah, I think that's what makes it a real interesting fight, But yeah, I think when you look at some of the weaknesses of both fighters, I think Moses Itauma, weaknesses for me is he just hasn't been tested yet, and it's a question mark. Whether you call it a weakness or not, I think that's where you have to wait and see. But I do think it's a weakness because it's a massive jump to go from someone like Marius Wack, who hasn't fought for years. I think Dillian Whyte fought him like 6 years ago, to go ahead and fight Dillian Whyte, or Dempsey McKean, who's done absolutely nothing, to be honest with you, and go ahead and fight Dillian Whyte. So I think it has to be a weakness, because Dillian Whyte will have a lot of experience over Moses Itauma. And some of the weaknesses in his game is that he's more or less, he takes 2 steps back and he does it in a straight line. So when the opponent is trying to set up a punch, it looks like he's just going back in a straight line. And he keeps his hands very low as well. And when he throws, he really commits and he keeps his hands there and he stays in the pocket. He doesn't necessarily jump out. And that could be because of the opponents he's facing. He's confident to stay in the pocket, So sometimes you can't, sometimes you got to take these things with a pinch of salt, because it just could be that, he's adapting to whoever he faces, really. So it's going to be interesting against Dillian Whyte in terms of how he approaches the fight. But we'll see how it's all gonna play out. But yeah, I think with Dillian Whyte, in terms of his weaknesses, personally, look, he's been in a lot of wars. There's a question mark over his punch resistance. Can he still take a punch? The uppercut, of course, is a kryptonite for him. If anybody lands an uppercut on his chin, everybody thinks it's lights out. He went down against Povetkin with an uppercut. He went down against AJ with an uppercut. He went down against Oscar Rivas with an uppercut. So it begs the question, what happens if an uppercut, is thrown and lands? People probably say lights out. So I think this is the problem. Will Moses land? And I think that's why, because he's so sharp and so quick, people believe that Moses is going to land. But stylistically, I think Moses would want a clean technical fight. He likes fighting at mid-range. He likes to pick his punches, and he wants his fight more or less at a slower pace. I think it suits him because he could be able to stay there and pick his punches and feint and move, and he's got great lateral movement. So it's going to be interesting to see how this fight more or less plays out. But if I had to make a prediction on who wins this fight, I think Moses Itauma will start fast. I think he will start very fast. I don't think he wants to go beyond 6 rounds. just because I think he knows the risk of if either fighter lands, it could be lights out for both fighters, to be honest with you. So I don't think he wants to be in that fight for longer than within 6 rounds. I think he wants to start fast and try to land a punch really early. And I think I've seen his team and himself emphasize that, like, if the game plan is executed, then it could be a real early night. So I believe that they're going to start really, really fast. And if you watch most of his fights, he starts really, really fast. And I think that's where the tension comes, because it might put Dillian Whyte on the back foot maybe in the beginning. Who knows? But I think Dillian Whyte's going to he'll be very disciplined, I think, in this fight. Mature performance, in my opinion. I think he's going to be passive aggressive. I don't think you can go out there and just, get as close as possible and just try to hit the body straight away. I think you have to be very mature and be passive aggressive, more like a Canelo type approach. You're just trying to sneak yourself inside and see, and it's all about timing. And that's the thing. People are talking about speed, but it's also about timing. Dillian Whyte's got great timing. He's got catch counters, and he's got a high ring IQ. People forget Dillian Whyte has a high ring IQ just because he's lost 3 times in his career. Some people think, he's gonna get knocked out. But honestly, when you look at Dillian Whyte, he's very smart. It's very smart. But yeah, I think it really depends upon Dillian. And personally for me, I think Moses Itauma is going to tire himself out with a lot of the feints that he throws, because a feint can be just as tiring as throwing a punch. So if he tries to be very, he wants to be unpredictable by throwing loads of feints, I don't think Dillian Whyte's going to fall for them. I think he's going to, move forward, move out the way. And he's got very long arms, Dillian Whyte. His arms are literally goes down to his toes. So I think it's going to be quite interesting how this fight is going to go. But I think he's got a really good jab, Dillian. Strong jab. And I think he's just trying to get in the inside. So this is my prediction. I don't think Whyte's going to give, the first 4 rounds away. I know it's going to be early doors. I think he's going to second round going to start really slow. Not too slow. I think he's just going to be alert. And people forget Dillian Whyte has been working on his defense in the last couple of fights. I don't think people have noticed. Against Jermaine Franklin, Christian Hammer and Benita Tete, I think he has been working on his defense, especially against Jermaine Franklin, because Jermaine Franklin was throwing loads of uppercuts that day, but he uses his high guard and the cross guard. I don't know if people see that he uses his cross guard nowadays, and it's been working. And like, they've had a lot of time to work on stuff in camp, so I would imagine they would have worked on his defense a lot. So I think, look, it's going to be a mature performance. I think it's going to be Dillian Whyte's best performance, to be honest with you. And I see Dillian Whyte winning this fight by knockout in the 8th round. And yeah, some may think I'm being deluded, but I think to beat Moses, you have to get him off the rhythm. And I think for someone that can get him off his rhythm would be someone like Dillian Whyte, who is a head and body puncher. And he's very unorthodox, very awkward. And I think he makes this fight a real difficult fight. So I'm going for Dillian Whyte to beat him by knockout. And I say it's 8th round knockout, mature performance, Dillian Whyte's best performance. And it's going to be a tough fight, competitive fight. But I see Dillian Whyte winning by knockout. Anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. And let's go. Boom.